Ahoy! We have some very interesting news about Throne and Liberty. Now, to say that the actual gameplay of Throne and Liberty was a disappointment would be a massive understatement. The first version that players got their hands on was a massive letdown. In fact, it was so bad that even people who hadn't talked about Throne and Liberty previously talked about how bad it was. I had made a video about Throne and Liberty previously when it still looked promising, but I felt it wasn't even worth making a follow-up video. It wouldn't have been beating a dead horse, it would have been beating a dead horse, dancing on its grave, and sending congratulations letters to the horse's entire family. And since the criticism of the game didn't just come from the Western audience, even the Korean audience was very unhappy with many aspects, the game was delayed once again. It was already announced that we would be seeing changes to the combat system to make it less static. Now, I'll be honest, as a big fan of New World, I don't expect it to ever be as dynamic as New World or as action combat focused. I think it will be more in the traditional realms of MMOs, but with certain aspects being more dynamic as it was originally planned, and with some more movement involved. But at least that appeals to someone out there. And yesterday, a German website, MeinMMO, released a new interview. This interview is in German, but it contains a lot of interesting information about the future of Throne and Liberty and the plans that the devs have now and what systems they want to change, and how the Amazon version, the Western version, will also differ. To make it very clear at this point, I'm not going into this from the perspective of this is going to fully revive the game, this is going to make it good, this is going to make everyone happy. Absolutely not. I'm going at this from the perspective of maybe it's worth not entirely writing off Throne and Liberty just yet. After their initial mobile game AFK Farm Simulator, they have a lot to prove, they have a lot to come back from. And words alone will absolutely not convince me that they're capable of doing that. But if they can put these words into action and we can see results later down the road that actually match what they are promising us here, then maybe, just maybe, the game might end up being worth another look. If they don't manage to do that and we just write the game off forever, then so be it, but I figured it's worth at least informing you about what they are talking about at the moment. Some of the aspects touched upon in this interview are the implementation of PvP and forced PvP areas, autoplay in general, and pay to win as well. The whole thing also comes with a big disclaimer that obviously everything is a work in progress currently. Let's begin with the whole forced PvP conversation. They do a little dance here where they're not quite honest in how they're answering, which is probably the biggest red flag for me in the interview, because they are asked about forced PvP and one of the answers is there will probably be situations where you accidentally end up in PvP, but I personally have managed to avoid open world PvP entirely. And if you stay outside of the PvP marked zones, then you won't be attacked. But that kinda skips the whole part of maybe to achieve certain content, to reach certain things, you need to be involved in the PvP, so you can't actually avoid it if you want to get to any relevant late game content, for example. So kinda not saying much by saying I personally can avoid it. But anyways, the zones in general are by default PvE areas, and they have outposts which can be claimed or can be fought over, and this happens every 2 to 3 days. When this happens, the area is an open PvP zone, but that is scheduled beforehand. So this was the original plan that they already had with the PvP zones, which I think is fine, honestly. Forced PvP at certain specific times is very easily avoidable if you don't want it, and it very much concentrates the PvP for the people who want PvP. There are also world bosses and world events where PvP exists, and that has a specific ring around it. Again, this seems like, yeah, you have to enter this ring to get to the world boss, you have to be PvP flagged to actually get there. But there will also be world events without PvP. In a Korean interview, a night PvP mode was announced where there's no karma systems and no restrictions, so it's very brutal essentially. This will apparently not be in the Western version, in the one that is being released by Amazon. However, there are certain dungeons that are only open at night, and in those dungeons you will be PvP flagged. They are also experimenting with pure PvE dungeons, but they're not sure if they will actually release those. They do emphasize that the focus of Throne and Liberty is on PvP, it is a PvP MMO. Control of the territories is important, and you have your guild that you play with, but those have a restriction of 50 to 70 people who can play together, and in those open world fights a lot more people can get involved, so suddenly diplomacy is a thing. For example, there is a castle in the game, and this castle can be sieged every 2 weeks. And in order to do this siege, you can form alliances with other guilds and avoid friendly fire that way. However, these alliances can be broken at any point during the fight, and suddenly you might be facing people that you were just siding with a moment ago if they decide it's for their own benefit to cut you out of the profits. Whoever owns the castle also gets additional benefits, but some of those have to be actively collected. So, for example, there are outposts that collect taxes, and those taxes have to be brought to the castle. Other guilds can then decide to attack the caravan that's bringing the gold on the way and steal a part of it, or even all of the taxes. That in particular I think is a very interesting mechanic that, if well executed, it would be something that I would also like to see in other MMOs. When it comes to autoplay, there are also going to be significant changes. In the next playtest, there will be no autoplay at all. Amazon has deactivated the feature completely. They want to see if the deactivation is well received, since apparently not everyone hates the autoplay. The devs argue that the autoplay had a purpose and is connected to the grind system, so it's not a final decision, but they want to see what the feedback from the players is. I think if you have any grind in your game that is so mundane that it can be taken over by an autoplay feature, then it's better to just not have it. If core mechanics of the game hinge on that, then that doesn't mean you should bring autoplay back, it means you should fix the core mechanics of your game. When it comes to monetization, the Western version of Throne and Liberty won't have any pay to win. For example, an item that was criticized was a token that allows you to autoplay for 8 hours after logging off, so you get some extra farm in without doing anything. Items like that won't be in the Western version, even though this particular one wouldn't make any sense without autoplay anyways. When it comes to gearing, the system is random drops with targeted upgrades. Depending on the rarity of the item, it can be upgraded to a different level. Green items can be upgraded up to 6 times, rarer items up to 12 times. It is possible for upgrading to fail, which will still consume resources, but it will never destroy or downgrade your item if that happens. I think this is very good because this is a massive time sink in some other games and a very frustrating experience. You can also craft rare items for yourself through the crafting system. Amazon is very heavily focused on the console version of the game as well. They're aiming to involve consoles in the next test, and they would like to release it at the same time as the PC version. There will definitely be crossplay between the platforms. As mentioned, the static combat is getting reworked, and the person writing the article was allowed to test the new combat system for 30 minutes. But they're leaving us with a bit of a cliffhanger, and they're not telling us how the combat is, and they're telling us to come back next week when they talk more about that in particular. If it is worth talking about, then I'll of course discuss that as well. When it comes to the release date, for now it's just 2024, nothing set in stone here at all, and I think that's just very logical based on the fact that they will have to very much find out how the feedback affects what they now need to change about the game, and that might cause further delays. They definitely have their work cut out for them, and honestly I hope they succeed just so that we have some more competition in the MMO genre. But again, I remain very, very skeptical until I actually see any of those improvements and get to experience them firsthand. We'll have to find out how far away that still is, and it's also going to be interesting what happens to the Australian players, because as far as I know, there are no Australian servers planned, at least at this point, and I don't think that the Eastern version of the game will be very appealing to most Australians. I will keep you updated as long as it is worth updating about this, and if you're interested in that, consider subscribing and clicking the bell to get notified. In the next days, we'll of course talk about New World again. Thanks to my patrons for supporting this video, and thank you for watching. SLOTH out.